I will, when I can find it, open the meeting with a karakia. So my karakia is whakaturia mai. Whakaturia mai ti uru kakatia, whakaturia mai ti uru taumatua. Katoa ona pakia katia, ka rona kaupekahia. Kia rangi whawha, kia aorangi. I whakamaru maru, I whakaruru hau, I ti iwi e. Hui, wiro, taumai te Māori. Omi e, hui e. Nice, thanks very much. So this meeting will be recorded and will be made available on the ECAN website. I've been informed there's a quorum here, so we'll get started on the meeting. Now, I'm not sure if Craig is online, Craig Mackle. Not yet online, but Craig has got a COVID in his household, so Craig can't make it down, which is unfortunate. So hopefully we can see him a bit later in the meeting. And the other thing I'd just like to make mention of is a pretty warm welcome to you, Mark Heisenbuckle, Southern Manager for Kiwi Rail, is at the table. Mark hasn't got a statutory role on this committee, but hopefully we'll be able to fix that up one day, Mark, so that he can fully take part in this. And I was just saying to Mark before, when I was speaking to him, that regional governance meeting last week when we had, Sam was there, we had Mayor Wood, Minister Wood on the line. I talked to him about Kiwi Rail, asked him about Kiwi Rail, and asked him about coastal shipping, and the government's still full ahead with those programs. So that's really good to know, and gives us an opportunity to actually do some good work with you. And my understanding is that you and Jess and Luke have a catch up, so that's good enough. So yeah, welcome. I'm not aware of any conflicts of interest. There are no public forums, deputations, or commission or petitions. Extraordinary urgent business is none. There's no notice of motion, so we'll move to the minutes.
If I may, thank you. Just as a matter of urgent business, but it's just really to get it on the table on behalf of the community of Taranui. So if I'm able to have a moment at the end, that'd be good. General business, thank you.
So the minutes of the meeting held on 25th of August 22 were confirmed in accordance with Canterbury Regional Council Standing Order 28.4 on the 6th of September 2022. Is there anything in those minutes that need to be altered for accuracy? If not, the recommendation is on the screen. Could I have a mover for that, please? Thank you, Nigel. And a second, thank you, Murray. All those in favour, please say aye. All those against, that's carried. So move to 8.1 report items, and yeah, I'll leave Jessie to run through these report items as we get through them, and we do the recommendation. Then Jess, you go on to the next one. So over to you.
Kia ora koutou. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So this is the status of resolutions report brought through to the committee. Includes the resolutions from the previous meeting and any incomplete actions. And I just draw the committee's attention to page 41 of the agenda, which includes a couple of actions that are in progress, but also being reported in this committee meetings papers. So happy to take any questions, Mr. Chair, but everything's on track in that respect. So
thanks, Sam.
Great to see the report. Wondering about the follow-on next meeting. All the green will drop off, and we'll just see the things that are yet to be complete, and just simplify down to the set of actions that we're waiting to see.
My governance colleagues, but yes, that's getting the thumbs up, and that's the expectation. So this will be refreshed as we go along. Yeah.
All right, thank you. Recommendation is on the screen now. See it, have a moment for that. Thank you, Dan. You happy? To second it, sorry, Sam moved it. Yeah, Dan, you can second it. Thank you. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against, that's carried. So 8.2, Jess.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you again. So the purpose of this report is threefold. This is a briefing to the incoming committee and updated terms of reference. So firstly, this is to provide you with some background information and briefing material on the purpose and functions of this committee. This material is appended to the papers. Secondly, it's also to seek your approval of the updated terms of reference for this committee, incorporating the new responsibilities under the 2022 setting of speed limits rule. Paragraphs 4 to 7 of the report outline the reasons for seeking the changes to the terms of reference, and we'll be briefing you more fully on the rule and the proposed approach to implementing it as part of the next items on the agenda. And thirdly, this is to ask the committee to appoint one of its own members to chair the Regional Road Safety Working Group for the duration of this triennium, which was the approach taken by the committee in the last term. So in the interest of time, Mr. Chair, I'll take the rest of the report as read. Happy to answer any questions in respect to the paper and also the recommendations on page 43 of your papers.
Thank you, Juicy. Any matters of clarification for Juicy? Thank you, Neil.
Just what on page 49, it says the regional land transport plan is repair one every 6 years. I thought it was 3, but
So 3, Mr. Chair. So it's prepared every 6 years, reviewed every 3 years. And we're in the current review cycle. So that's part of the papers that are on here today as well.
Anybody else for clarification? All right. The first part that I'd like to do here is we need a chair for the Regional Road Safety Working Group. Now, Mayor Gordon holds that position at this point in time, but is there a nomination from the table for that position?
say that I'd be happy to continue, but if someone else would like to, I'm more than happy to allow that opportunity. But I have enjoyed working with our staff on that, but it's no trouble if someone else would like to undertake that.
Thank you for that. Dan, I'm not too sure if there's going to be a line of people behind you wanting to do that. Sorry, Nigel. Yeah.
Yep.
Thanks, Dan. I think that the good thing about that is that you've done a pretty good job on sort of realigning that up a bit. So thanks for doing that. Now we've got all these motions here. We'll do the first 4, I think, which are all pretty straightforward. You happy with it? Or were you happy to take them all? Happy to take them all? All right. She's put Carrie there. We haven't got them. Thanks. Oh, you're preempting. So they were moved by. So the nomination was moved by Nigel and seconded by Craig. So now the recommendations. Are you happy to do the same with the recommendations? Not here, so those happy to do the same. So all those in favour of those recommendations that are in your paper, but are also on page 43, but also on the screen, you can see half of them. One happy to support those. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. All those against. That's also carried. So thank you very much for that. Thank you, Dan. 8.3. So we've got a wee bit of time available for this because there is a bit of detail around that, and the approach is important. And I think, Jesse, you want to introduce that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, yeah, I'll bring Tiara Thorby up to the table, who's our strategy advisor in the transport team. And she's just going to take you through the paper, key points to the paper, and happy to answer any questions. I think this is Tiara's first time in front of the committee as well. So thanks, Tiara. Over to you.
Yeah, kia ora. The purpose of this report is to brief you on the Regional Speed Management Plan for Canterbury. We are seeking approval for staff to progress with this work, taking a light touch to operationalising the rule, creating a 2024 to 2027 Regional Speed Management Plan. Regional Speed Management Plans are a new statutory role for Canterbury Regional Transport Committee, the Canterbury Regional Transport Council, for road controlling authorities. These responsibilities are summarised in paragraph 3 of your report. Staff working closely with road controlling authorities, Waka, Kotahi and legal teams to ensure that all our obligations are met under the rule. Based off legal advice and Waka Kotahi guidance, staff have analysed 2 broad options for operationalising this rule. The more comprehensive option is focused on going above and beyond the rule requirements to facilitate regional consistency driven by the Canterbury Regional Transport Committee. The light touch approach prioritises the regional speed management plan, which is created in collaboration with local RCAs and the Waka Kotahi area program manager. Both approaches are outlined in the report. It's important to note that the legislative purpose of the regional speed management plan is to ensure and to promote regional consistency across the region. Later in 2023, staff will come back to the committee with objectives and policies relating to central government road strategies and a whole of network approach that promotes regional consistency. At a road controlling authority level, it is important to recognise that this role is intended to promote long-term planning of speeds. All these speed change projects and implementation of physical assets will be wrapped up into one large package for funding bids. The Regional Speed Management Plan is a new statutory requirement of the committee and Canterbury Regional Council. There are reputational risks that if the process is duplicative or complex, there are reputational risks to this. We are working with Waka Kotahi and local RCA staff to mitigate this risk. Staff are also working closely with the Canterbury Regional Council's Tuia team and comms and engagement team to ensure we develop a robust process for Māori and Rūnanga engagement for speed in Canterbury. I'll take the rest of the paper as read and I'm happy to take any questions.
Yeah, thank you for that, Tiara. Any clarification sort of, Tiara? Sam?
Yeah, thank you for the report and speaking to us today. Questions are around what does light touch, if we agree to light touch, what is that really going to entail and what are we missing out on? Like, it's kind of, if it's A or B, it's very binary. And so just wondering what there is between those two. I guess as an example, we've spent a whole lot of effort and time lowering speed limits around Greater Christchurch and Selwyn and the roads that connect into the city on an area-wide basis. But just globally lowering speeds to save on road maintenance investment isn't going to be, like there's a completely different reason for coming at this. It's so just wondering why or where the lines would be drawn around that. And also, it's been discussed around this table about global speed limits for gravel roads. And so, is this the mechanism that would enable us to set a 60 or an 80 gravel road for Canterbury speed limit that's not going to require a few hundred metres and new signs to be put up on a gravel road? Like at the moment, it's ridiculous doing it district by district, and also the signage requirements are pretty prohibitive as well. So, can you just explain how that would flow out through these two, either light touch or the other way?
Yeah, so I guess the main point is that I completely acknowledge that you do have two hats in this. So the regional speed management plan from the committee would, taking a light touch approach would mean that we're not rewriting speeds, we're not contesting speeds that the local TAs have decided to go with. The rule does allow for the RTC to have the power to potentially not contest, but discuss speeds with each local TA, obviously in the interest of time and staff capacity at our level. We just don't have the resources to go through. So it's taking the trust and the work that we're already doing with the TAs to really ensure that everyone's on the same page. And we're not rewriting, we're not overly making the complex approach and rewriting speeds as we go. That will be at a TA level. Yeah, so in theory, it will just be about priorities and principles and visions at the RTC level.
And normally what we do is ask staff to step back now, but you can stay where you are, actually. And James.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I just wondered if I could add comment to Mayor Broughton on the gravel roads, and staff will correct me if I am wrong, but my understanding of the problem that you're trying to get around on gravel roads is a national solution only, because it would effectively require an amendment to the open road speed limit for a gravel road, right? Because then you wouldn't be posting, you wouldn't have to post a difference. Drivers would know, road users would know if it's an open road speed limit and they're on a gravel road, this is the nationally consistent speed. And at the moment, that's an open road speed limit of 100, right? I'm not sure that there is a mechanism regionally to set a regional thing that would allow you to get away from the posting requirements that fall from departing from the open road speed limit. I'm being a bit complex, but that's, yeah, I think it's national or bust.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Tiara. I'm just looking at page 76, step 5. There's a mention there of eventually possibly having regard to road safety aspects. Is this meaning that the work of the road safety group will kind of be working in tandem if this is seen as a road safety issue?
Yes, that's correct. So we are already working with the TAs to develop principles and agreed approaches to the speeds. We have tabled those with the Regional Road Safety Working Group earlier this month, and they have agreed. We will be refining those more as we now have the Waka Kotahi State Highway principles also, which will wrap up into that, take to the Regional Road Safety Working Group, and then punt up again. Yeah.
Thank you. I note with the government's reset on some items that this may be a matter that's being considered. James, is there any question through to James? Is there any update from the government on this? Because it's one of those very controversial matters that comes to our table, speed limits, as some of you will be aware when are debated at your councils.
No update as such, Mr. Chair. But I'd note that, I mean, Parliament is sovereign and can change it, but it would probably require a statutory mechanism to short circuit the rule change process that we all know from the experience of changing the rule to where we are now took an awfully long amount of time. So if we're looking for a change ahead of the consultation process that RCAs are about to have to undergo mid-year, that's really only going to come by way of parliamentary intervention.
Yeah, you can thank for that, and thank for the light touch explanation. I think it's a bit like approaching a nest of snakes myself, but there we are. I think one of the things that we need to take into account here is that the events that we've got going on with our northern cousins are going to mean a whole lot of change. You know, and one of the things that that I've had a discussion with James about just very briefly is that we really need to take a decent look at what road funding is going to look like. You know, the National Land Transport Fund is not going to have a recovery from COVID anytime soon. So we need, not for COVID, from this, it's even worse than COVID, is it's probably cancer, probably something. But we want to take that opportunity, and we've mentioned to Minister Wood when he was here in this building, we want to have a South Island conversation about that, because you can see things like this can be used to say, well, we can't fix your roads, you're just going to have to slow the traffic down on them. And you know, do we end up with having 5 classes of roads? We're on class 5, you can only do 40k and those sorts of things. I don't know, but I think we need, my opinion is, if we're doing our job as a regional transport committee, we need to start talking about that stuff because we can get in front of it with Minister, and Minister's pretty keen to have those conversations and just getting them and transport staff in the room on that. But we've developed that thinking, and I think I don't know what you think about that, James, or whether it's too early in the piece to do that or not, but I'd appreciate a comment from you at least.
Oh, look, I think the concerns are valid. When we, as you say, we've had an initial discussion. I think perhaps the discussion around the GPS and the GPS paper is probably going to get there. So if that's okay, I'll make a substantive comment then. But the GPS, as I understand it, is where we're going to start having the conversation about funding. So it's definitely coming and necessary.
From my point of view, I think it's a matter of let's get ready for that and trying to figure out where, you know, we might line something up, our ducks up. Anyway, on 8.3, the recommendation is on the screen in front of you. So could I have someone move that, please? Thank you, Craig. Thank you. Seconded by Sam. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. All those against, that's carried. So thank you, Tiara, for that paper. Now moving on. Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just caught on the table Lynn Fleet from our public transport team. Lynn's our senior strategy advisor. He's going to speak to you about the regional public transport plan review process that's underway. So over to you, Lynn.
Thank you. The regional public transport plan, you have the paper before you. I'm quite prepared to if you wish to, that we take it as read. Essentially, the regional public transport plan, it's been developed. ECAN obviously has the authorisation, I suppose, to operate public transport under the Land Transport Management Act in Canterbury. We fund it and finance it. The regional public transport plan is essentially the business rules to run that process. We're conscious that it's been a largely urban discussion to provision of public transport plan, public transport throughout New Zealand and obviously in Canterbury, with 82% of the population based in Greater Christchurch. It's been largely a Greater Christchurch and Timaru discussion. We're also conscious that in this round, with the emissions reduction plan and talk about vehicle kilometres travelled reduction, that it needs to be broadened. Essentially, that's why we're here discussing this with the Regional Transport Committee. It's an opportunity, I guess, for this committee to get involved in the process and understand it, and to also feedback to us as ECAN if you have any concerns or you wish to expand the thinking. The Regional Public Transport Plan obviously works together with the Regional Land Transport Plan, which this committee is responsible for. And basically, the Regional Land Transport Plan will have an overarching strategic influence on the public transport plan. So, as I say, if there are any questions or anything, prepared to take them.
Okay, thanks, Liam. Any clarifications sought from you?
Sorry, just a brief comment from me, Mr. Chair. Just really to endorse Len's comments, that the role that PT will play, particularly in Greater Christchurch in terms of meeting the emissions reduction targets and the VKT reduction targets, is critical. So I just endorse the work. It's really important that we get on with it.
Thanks, Len. Just a clarification from me. Related to the process of getting information and liaising with everybody, there are sort of 4 things that I've noted that will probably impact on what people contribute to the exercise. One of them is new legislation, the NBA bill, the spatial planning bill, and presumably that may have some implications. Secondly, the GCP consultation documents out today, closes the 26th of March, and that'll get some good feedback from people about the spatial plan for the Greater Christchurch area and the mass rapid transit. So presumably that's them too. The other thing that Environment Canterbury is doing, of course, is the Regional Council's integrated planning process, which ends 2020 or goes through to 2024. And I was kind of looking at your time frame and thinking, well, okay, how do those things impact it? And the final thing really is in terms of the regional transports, look at passenger rail and any potential that passenger rail as a public transport facility might occur within this planning process. Are they things that you will look at as well?
Through the chair, the answer for those is obviously yes, and essentially from a strategic point of view, the Greater Christchurch transport planning and the regional land transport planning elements need to be acknowledged in the regional public transport plan, but we hope to see them through working through the development of all those processes. We hope to see it actually working so that they influence the strategic front end of the public transport plan, so that essentially public transport plan becomes a way that we say, well, okay, public transport's an enabler of a lot of the things that are desired out of those other plans, and this is how we go about actually producing the results through using PT, and that should be reflected in the public transport plan side of things.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I guess a key point that we would want considered from our district's perspective is in the next RPTP is inter-district connectivity. between our key activity centres and complementary services which support enhanced PT. In the past, there's been a bit more of a focus on public transport in the city, and understand that and around the CBD. So just want to be assured, Len, that that's to be considered as part of this next exercise.
Through the chair, thank you, Mayor Gordon. Fortuitously, I was having a discussion with Shane Binder just yesterday, and we discussed the whole layout of Waimakariri district and how it works with Greater Christ in the Greater Christchurch context, and also how we service the communities of Rangiora, Kaiapoi, Port Pegasus, how that all joins together. So we are very conscious of that. Obviously, we have to we have the Greater Christchurch partnership, and the work on the PT Futures business case has been developed, but there are also opportunities there, I think, to drill down into what the district needs, and that's an opportunity for us to work with the likes of Shane and yourself and the community to get an idea of what we have to deliver out in Waimakariri for the people of Waimakariri, of which I am one.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This may well be a bit of a daft question from a strategic perspective, but I just wondered, does this, in the absence of public transport in the community of Whirinui, we have a range of community vehicle trusts which sits under the ECAN umbrella. Will that feed into the plan? Because, you know, it's certainly an integral part of connecting communities like ours that have no other option. Thank you.
Through the chair, yes, the answer to that is that the policies and procedures that run the community vehicle trusts and that are included as part of the regional public transport plan at the moment will continue to be so in the future. There's also policies around regional connections and how that works, and how we would go out effectively and plan for those if there was a community desire to, or an expression of a community desire to have those in place, which probably leads back to Councillor Edge's earlier comment about passenger transport. We have to be flexible enough in our plan to cater for all those modes and all those different types of setups.
Thank you. Paragraph 13 follows on from what Dan was saying, but you've put in here that you'd like to reach out to any authority that wants to expand their service. How do we register that? And what do we expect? Like, what's the conversation? What's the next stage for that conversation? You've sort of got 8 months of the year where that conversation happens. So just a little more detail on that.
Best way to reach out to us is to work through your transport management teams in your local districts, and through TOG, the Transport Officers Group that RTC run through. We will be working with them, and we've actually attended their last TOG meeting. We'll have people at their TOG meetings from now on in, just being there, listening. We're also only email away or a discussion away. Pleased to have those conversations, and that's probably the conduit that we want to make sure we don't miss anything effectively, because as I say, it's been a largely urban conversation for a lot of time, and not only in Canterbury but in the whole of New Zealand, and now we need to consider what's going on a little bit more broadly.
Yes, sort of in the councils that don't have public transport, and Ashburton is one of them. We do have one community vehicle, but not allowed to operate in the Ashburton township itself, because there's a taxi there which provides whatever they provide, but people say it's too expensive. They would like public transport. We're a small community, so where do we fit in here? Because if you wanted to achieve the greenhouse gas reductions, well, we're not reducing nothing in Ashburton the way we're going. So what do we? How do we fit in?
Through the chair, it's while ECAN is responsible for running public transport services, we're conscious we have to work through the community, and you people as mayors and your councils work closely with those communities. If there is a desire to put in new services, then ECAM can signal that through the regional land transport plan as an activity in the regional land transport plan. Now, I would expect that if it's signalled and we have to then go and rate for those services because it would be subsidised public transport, we'd have to also have a broader conversation with the likes of Waka Kotahi over whether there's a need for a business case process to actually prove that the need for that service and provide that, you know, Waka Kotahi has the money to actually put into it and the local share comes in as well. So
the only comment I was going to make in terms of the Waimakariri discussion just before as well was the enabling Kāinga and Honga on the Māori reserve land as well as part of the considerations that we're entertaining through the discussions of the Greater Christchurch space. So that's another, you mentioned, Len, the townships of Rangiora, Kaipoi, Wood and Pegasus, but there's a big bit of land there in the middle that we're still a little bit uncertain as to how that's going to proceed, but just wanted to make that note.
Thanks, Len. The comment that I would make also is that, again, not name dropping, but Minister did say on Friday about the Piton model, and I think that's going up. And James, get my timing right on that before government in next month for discussion.
I haven't stayed up to date with the rapidly moving legislative agenda, but yeah, it is a priority this year. Yeah.
So the opportunity around that is that the change in the way that you access that service will change, and typically, and I'll get this wrong, but typically you go out and you put a route, say Route 27 up. Companies will come in and they will bid on that route so much per year or whatever it is, and it's usually the life of the bus, so it's like a 9-year period. Change to the Piton model means we have an opportunity to do a couple of things. One is to talk to Phil, Dan and Sam about infrastructure that they have, about where the speed, where the single lanes are, where the bus stops are and those sorts of things. And we have more of an opportunity, I think, just to maybe cut some of this stuff up. We can also have the opportunity to then bring into the conversation those other bits that keep occurring here about like a My Way type service across regional New Zealand. One of the things that you're dead right. One of the things that is really important if we're going to do this, then there needs to be a mover in terms of putting people in bulk, if you like, to go places rather than single cars. So again, that's something that will be in front of us in the next wee while. So we'll just keep you up to date on that and where we're at on that as that development goes ahead. And I think already city staff and our staff are talking about infrastructure and how that sits and where it sits. All right. Not to prolong this too much more, we'll go to the recommendations that are on page 79. And they are, thank you, Len, and up there on the screen, 1, 2, and 3. Do I have a mover, please? Thank you, Mari. A seconder. Thank you, Nigel. Have a mover and seconder. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. All those against. And that is carried. And I should have pointed out that the key man for public transport and environment Canterbury is in the room, and he's sitting down the end there at the end of the table. And I don't know if all of you people know Giles, but Giles recently picked up the portfolio as director for public transport, which he's really thrilled about. So welcome to the meeting, Giles. All right, we'll move to the next item, 8.5. Jesse.
Through you, Mr. Chair. Just want to invite Claire Patterson up to the table to speak to the Regional Land Transport Plan review, and in particular the updating of the strategic framework. So over to you, Claire.
Kia ora koutou. The purpose of this paper is to get approval of the strategic framework that informs the development of the plan as we move forward this year as officers. There's 4 recommendations there, but I'd like to draw your attention to 2 particular areas. One on page 85, which has the options. So the committee has a responsibility under the LTMA to consider alternative options when reviewing the plan. We've developed options based on the better business case model of having a do minimum, a do maximum, your status quo, and another one there. So that's where you'll see those 4 options. Option 1 of the do minimum is to defer improvements. While usually in a usual context, this is not considered an option, this is actually a real option at the moment in transport, is to defer significant improvements in case they have been misplanned for a transport future that we're just not facing at the moment, and that's something that Wales has decided to do currently, is to defer some of their roading improvements. We're not recommending that in Canterbury. As staff, we think that that would have impacts on the sector, and in particular, the capacity. You might start losing some transport capacity if that was the case. Option 2 is to retain the targets and the strategic framework as is, with a small change to the emissions reduction target to keep up with the pace of change. Option 3, which is the option recommended by staff, is to expand on the framework and a few changes to the objectives there, including new objectives around maintenance and growth, which weren't in the previous strategic framework but are issues in Canterbury. And option 4 is a do maximum, which is pushing for an extreme level of change. This is not probably affordable or feasible, and the committee has a responsibility to ensure the plan is affordable and feasible, so we do not recommend option 4. So those are the 4 options in the paper. The other part that I would like to highlight is on page 87 in terms of the emissions reduction focus and the work that staff have been doing to look at the evidence base behind this. And after working with Waka Kotahi's data guys and Stats NZ in a significant amount of work, there just isn't the data exists to quantify the impact of the policies that are proposed on the emissions reduction target. We know they align, but we can't quantify it, and that requires a change to some of the surveys and data collection at a central government level to build that database and that evidence base at the moment. So I just want to make sure the committee is aware of that as you consider your role under the LTMA. You need to consider emissions reduction, but you do not have a role to ensure that that target is achieved.
Clarification clear around that point that you've just made. The visibility of that, when will that be there? You know, you said your government needs to do some work to when's that like?
The transport emissions, the transport evidence-based strategy has been updated by Waka Kotahi to reflect that new data does need to be collected. So Waka Kotahi is progressing that work. It will get folded into things like the household travel survey, census, some of these large-scale pieces that it won't make this census. There'll be some that might make next census. So it's a long-term piece.
I guess the other point with that is, you know, what does this slow down for us? So James, I'll make a comment and then Phil.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. No, look, it is just to note, I think the point staff are making here is, while we can't quantify the exact impact of each policy intervention yet, because we don't have the data sets and we won't for some time, we know they'll have an impact, and we don't have the time to wait until we've built the data set in order to know. So we have to start and quantify as we go, is I think the basic position.
So just so I'm on the right track, we can't measure what we're telling people to do, or am I misunderstanding something here?
We have the
more than this.
So those bullet points over the page are to give you an idea of the size, scale and pace of change to meet that emissions reduction target. We don't have the evidence in order to put in the plan those particular bullet points. So I've put it in the paper so you're aware, to give you an idea of actually achieving that emissions reduction target and what it looks like is on that kind of scale of change of like level 3 lockdown, transport changing. What if in 10 years time your petrol vehicle was in level 3 lockdown. You can still go wherever you want to go and do whatever you want to do, but you've got to do it without using a petrol vehicle. It's that kind of scale of change that transport staff are grappling with. And I'm not recommending that we pick up these targets in particular because we don't have the evidence base to say that. But walking, cycling, public transport, shared modes of travel, that is what the future low emissions transport system will look like 20, 30 years time.
Sorry, this is what I'm told around the council day in and day out. It's rammed in our throat. The only way that we can lower emissions is all those things that you've just said, but nothing on there is it says low emissions like vehicle fleet. We should be pushing harder towards alternative fuels, like the one you've got in number 42. Like that, people read our council minutes and stuff, and they say the only way that they would get the impression that the only way we're going to lower emissions is by putting cycleways and bus lanes in. That's not the only way, is it?
In terms of Christchurch itself, I've been looking at the Canterbury level, and there isn't a Canterbury transport model to underpin the Canterbury RLTP. So there may be different evidence for Christchurch itself. I can't speak to that. But in terms of Canterbury wide, all of the councils, I don't have the evidence to sit in front of you and say this is what needs to be.
Okay, thank you. Can you just explain number 42 about hydrogen vehicles a little bit more to me, please?
Yes, so the model and the data sets that have been collected are based on our current transport system. And we know that that's shifting. We know that there's electric vehicle uptake. We know that there's people looking at hydrogen, and we don't know what that rate of uptake will look like, what the rate of supply into New Zealand will look like. So there is that shift happening, which will also contribute to a zero emissions transport system, which is the ultimate goal. And that, so these bullet points, which are kind of more focused on passengers and a little bit on the rail shift, that will be in the future zero emissions transport system. That will also have hydrogen vehicles and drones and those sorts of parts to it. But we need to work on that.
No, sorry, Chair. I just I'm looking at, say, takes the likes of we should be encouraging bigger stuff to get changed to hydrogen or electric. Once you get into great big stuff, line haul stuff, electric's no good. It has to be hydrogen because the batteries are too heavy. But take the likes of a truck that delivers bread or Coke bottles or something around town. If you change one of those little delivery trucks to alternative fuel, that's 16 or 18 cars that you don't have to change. So we should be going for the things that make us happen faster, quicker. It's like having was Dan having shots of whiskey instead of mixing it with your Coke. Yeah. No, but you see, I mean, we should be encouraged, and I know this moves afoot for H.W. Richardson right now, modifying trucks for $150,000 a truck to move to 50% hydrogen. We should be encouraging ECAN and assisting them and helping them some way into modifying all of the remaining diesel buses, as long as they're not old and buggered, the ones that have got life left in them, for $150,000. It's not a lot of money to get a 50% reduction. Whereas if we make a bus lanes or cycleways, our payoff time is miles down the track, whereas we can put money into this, and the minute you turn the key, you've got instant 50% reduction. So I think we should be pushing alternative fuels, especially hydrogen, more.
So in the option 3, which is the recommended option by staff, we do recommend expanding the policies that are in the RLTP to be broader to cover those types of solutions, because what we found in the review was that the policies that were in the current RLTP are quite mode shift focused, and we know that with the current context, it's avoid, shift and improve. So we've put policies in there around support the expansion of sustainable transport energy infrastructure such as electric charging stations and hydrogen fuel stations. So making it more explicit. So I would say that the option 3 that's recommended with staff has is trying to put that forward.
Just cut in there because I think that's not criticism, it's a challenge to us, and it's outside of, doesn't matter what you put in your, we put in our AL2P. Richardson Group said we're going to do hydrogen, they just went and did it. It's, you know, so, and serendipitously, we've got the CIL out there sticking up a bloody whole lot of mirrors to, you know, to make power with Contact, is it, Johns? It's with Contact, and they're going to make hydrogen for an A320. Now, my whole head was going, well, shit, why don't we start thinking about making hydrogen earlier? Why don't we think about starting making hydrogen along the lines that you're talking about? And we've got another 2,500 acres out there. Why don't we just cover it all and just make hydrogen, you know? So those are things that we need to think about. So, sorry, Neil, then Anne, then Dan.
It seems to be pretty urban focused. I don't know how we in the rural area, Murray and Craig and Anne, we can't double the proportion of trips by walking. We can't double the proportion of trips by cycling. We can't double public transport uptake. We don't have any. The only bit we can do out of here, we can double the freight. Well, sorry, you can't. On rail. So the urban is going to have to subsidise the rural because rural just can't do any of these things. So it's I don't know if it's a nonsense. It's something's not gelling. Yeah.
I'm going to take you back to the proposed amended vision and compare it to the previous vision. I'm asking, going forward, where do you rate resilience, reliability, sustainably funded and safe?
So we actually had this discussion about the vision, and we do have a staff recommendation, which I wasn't quite sure, Treya, what the process was. Okay, to insert the word resilient into the vision. When we're strategy ninjas, we try to preempt your needs.
There's actually a similar point to Anne's just made around resilience because we also feel that should be included in there. But just to, I don't want to labour the point, but I think Mayor Phil's made it very well. But I would like to see us investigate and support that being considered with PT and other initiatives around the alternative use of fuel, particularly hydrogen. Because if you start to get a bulk of numbers, if NW Richardson are doing it, if ECAN considers it the PT fleet, then it starts to get an economy of its own. It starts to become more realistic. So whether it's outside of this, Mr. Chair, it would be really good to, I think, have that considered and discussed with us at some particular point, because I think where Mayor Phil's heading in that is sound and in the right direction.
Well, that point's well made, and I think the PTOM discussion also could include a discussion around that. Like, what does our future look like? Is it a hydrogen future? What's that opportunity? And those numbers that are coming to us now, you know, $150,000. It doesn't seem that expensive, actually, to do something. I mean, there's that whole thing about, you know, life and the rest of it. Sam.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I mean, support the transition away from carbon burning to other fuels. And the focus on this is metro, and that's good because that's where all the options are. So, say most of Selwyn doesn't have access to the public transport, and no one's going to walk 25 k's to do the shopping. So there's a difference here. But by focusing on where we do have all the options, it provides us the greatest opportunity to pick which ones are best in place, and actually then Christchurch can help lead the region in our overall improvement. But I also think that our obsession with single occupancy vehicles doesn't help the overall form of the city or our towns. And if we continue to grow in population and everyone that moves here still wants to drive their own vehicle somewhere, we can't afford the roading network that's going to be. And today was launched the spatial plan for Greater Christchurch and the MRT route, which is, I think, awesome to think about what that future could be. But that involves a complete mind shift and change around practice of how we live as Greater Christchurch to try and achieve this. So it needs to be what you said, Phil, and all this stuff. And it's really hard for those of us that have all driven here in a car by ourselves. And what that shift looks like within the city is going to be a real challenge too. So looking forward to what that feedback looks like. But the single occupancy vehicle mindset of Canterbury is the biggest challenge for us to overcome.
So it's sort of into discussion a wee bit. I'm kind of reminding us of the paper that we've got in here about strategic direction and strategic thinking, and part of that is about rail freight and alternatives to rail, not just a fuel exercise, minimising traffic on roads, whether they are hydrogen, electric, or whatever. And that's the bigger strategic picture that we need to look at. Of course, carbon emissions and rail is part of that carbon emission process. In terms of the urban environment, those mode shift transformations in terms of cycling, certainly the Greater Christchurch Partnership, one of the things in the GC 2050 process of asking the community what was their biggest thing, and it was greening our cities, making them healthier places to live. And that really applies to our small rural towns as well. You know, encouraging through urban design in Ashburton, for example, to have more people going to work and going shopping with a bike or walking. And so that, even though it might seem a small amount, it's still really, really important. But anyway, it's just to bear in mind. But I mean, we've got a bit of a process here, but I think the strategic direction is going to be important considerations later on. Yeah.
Perhaps if I could just clarify how we've approached the urban and rural policies. It's based on the research that was done by Research First on transport emissions reduction solutions, and that did take a good sized sample from each district. And when we were writing the policies, it was based on even, you know, what was Kaikoura saying, what was Huranui saying, what was Waimate saying, what was Mackenzie saying, and what were the policies that would suit. And that did include walking and cycling as feedback from those communities. So from my perspective, those policies have usually been applied to the, you know, the what we call the metro area. But in terms of a future transport system, it's an everywhere future, if that helps clarify where those policies apply.
I certainly think it does. I think we've probably come to the end of this discussion, Claire, but thank you for that. I mean, it's an opportunity to have this discussion. I think some stuff coming out of here that we can push on with outside of the bit that your statutory responsibility has you doing. So thank you. I mean, the point that's been made here is pretty good. But I mean, Mark, what was when we went down to Sinlay that time? How many trucks have they taken off the road down at Sinlay because of your hub?
Yeah, it's a good point, Mr. Chair. 16,000 trucks per annum, and when we roll out the Fiat and Freight Hub in Ashburton, it'll be similar. So you know, I think there's, you know, we're working through with Jesse and trying to explain to Jesse all the initiatives that we've got at Kiwi Rail in terms of what we're doing around lowering emissions. Our locomotives that are being built in Spain at the moment will be burning diesel, but they'll reduce the carbon emissions by 43%. And new ships that are coming are battery powered, and we're investigating in terms of future options in the North Island and what the next generation of locomotives will be in terms of the tri-brid, which will be able to operate on the electrics and the overheads. Also have a battery component, but also to be able to operate on fuel, and then obviously the hydrogen components coming into it. And we're looking at that not only on our trains, but also in our CT sites where we run 60 odd hoists across the country. So there's a lot of work going on in that space. Thanks, Peter.
Thank you for that. So I think that just, you know, slowly we're getting there. I mean, if you talk to the transport operators, that they're really keen on hubbing. You know, like Mark Waring started that. There's one going on in Timaru with Tomoka with you know, with the Aikens, and of course we've got Sinlay. James.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, not wanting to prolong the discussion, but it is just an item of clarification. Can you confirm that in agreeing to the option, we are also agreeing to the preferred policy set? Because I wouldn't want to lose that off. It's discussed. I'm just not sure I can see it clearly through the rec.
So with option 1, the policy set would die. With option 2, the policy set would stay the same because it's current state. With option 3, the policy set is provided in the appendix. And with option 4, it's not recommended by staff, so we didn't bother developing a policy set. But we could do if you chose it.
Good question. Thank you very for that. We'll move to the recommendation. Thank you very much. And the resilience is put in there in red. So that was a late addition to that. So if everyone's happy with that addition, then we'll just move them as they are on the screen. So just a mover for that, please. I think Sam, and thank you, Anne. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. All those against, that's carried. So thank you for that. 8.6. I think Claire, are you still here, Claire? 8.6. Yeah. Jess, do you want to introduce this or?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair. So, yeah, thanks. Just, Claire's up at the table obviously already, and just introduce James Stewart from Gemelli Consulting, who's going to work with Claire on this paper to introduce you to the innovative transport funding and financing options that we've been exploring. We took this paper through the Chief Executive's Forum as well for a bit of discussion, so just to highlight that point. So over to you, Claire and James, to run us through the presentation.
James.
So one of the roles of the committee is to, when reviewing the RLTP, is to consider funding options for the RLTP. When we looked at the significant challenge as transport officers to achieve some of these big, hairy strategic goals, that a figure was that this could be $1 billion, you know, to really get scale at change at scale and pace. And that was across the whole RLTP. That included maintenance, the whole gambit. So I quickly realised I was not the finance expert, and so brought on James, who's a very innovative thinker in terms of how to use finance, and so looking at it, the work that James has focused on is if there was a massive uplift in funding required, where would that innovative funding and financing potentially come from that we're currently not using in Canterbury but is being used elsewhere. So that kind of provides the context for the report, and then I'll be your driver, and this is your PowerPoint.
Thank you, Claire, and kia ora to everybody. It's been a privilege to help Claire and her team on this piece of work, thinking outside the square and saying $1 billion hypothetically is a big number. The BAU scenario would be rates. Is that palatable? No. And so what other options are out there? What have other entities across the globe done in order to raise capital and use capital well, in order to, at the end of the day, incentivise change, but also keep downward pressure on rates and drive behavioural change that's desired. Yep, that's the first slide there. Yeah, no, that's good. So we've taken a walk through that and looked at 12 different options on a long list. Some of them are very conservative and BAU, business as usual. Some of them are quite innovative and are pushing the boundaries. And obviously a few of those you're using already in terms of government funding, rates, debt, grants and bonds potentially. But the ones down the bottom half of the list are definitely thinking outside of the square and different tools that you might want to consider exploring for your toolkit, should you need a toolkit. So what we've done in the report is to summarise, we've mapped these. On the left is your more conservative traditional approaches, and then as you progress to the right, you move from things like traditional bonds to green bonds. You move towards things like payment for outcomes contracts, social impact bonds, PPPs, congestion charging, road pricing, and land value capture tags. So those ones with the asterisks next to them, I've got 5 or 6. We've just got a simple slide on each of those just to take for a quick walk through. This was a high-level desktop scan in order to figure out which ones might have the potential to add value to the committee and to the Greater Christchurch. over the next decade, and to potentially come up with an agreed list to explore in more detail should there be appetite to do so. So green bonds, as most of you will know, are similar to traditional bonds, but they're accessed, the capital's accessed from different markets, different sources. So these might be, there's a large amount of green capital sitting primarily in Europe, looking for a home coming out of the Paris Agreement in order to contribute towards green outcomes. So we call them a dual dividend scenario. So they're looking for capital. It's not looking for a return. It's not grants. But the return, the additional return that they're looking for is to see decarbonisation and reduction. If you asked me 12 months ago, it'd be probably a very different number. But it's, I'd probably say 2 or 3% below what the market is offering if you went out to institutional and wholesale investors in there. So it is a worthwhile piece in there. Because they do value those environmental dividends as well as the financial dividend. The inverse might be that they might be offering a similar interest rate, but they're more happy to take on a higher level of risk for the projects. So they're pricing their premium that way. Auckland Council have raised $1 billion in 2018. So going back 5 years ago, they raised $1 billion in this place here. And typically, they work really well for large capital projects that have got a tagged revenue stream, as opposed to going into a bucket where there may be a subsidy, a cross subsidy happening. Those potential ideas could be contributed to decarbonising the public transport fleet. Mayor of Christchurch, your idea around the extra $150,000 for those maybe 300 buses, there's $50 million that the private sector isn't looking at, have made a decision not to do at this stage. But if there was a fund that said, well, instead of your cost of capital at say 7% from the bank, we could offer you 4% funding for you to get those other 300 buses underway. The private sector is therefore incentivised to do something which contributes towards the greater outcome that everyone's trying to achieve. So those sorts of mechanisms there. And with a project of that scale, maybe the transport company wouldn't have access to a green bond, whereas a regional council would. So the regional council would be a facilitator and enabler to agglomerate those funds and maybe other funds in there. Yep, so we've talked about public transport. That might be electrification of the non-electrified buses. It might be on a more micro scale, a shared bike fleet. There's some really interesting examples overseas where green bonds have been used for private office developments, and they've said, great, you can go to the bank and borrow at 7% for your office development, but because your office development is going to be encouraging people to become to travel to the office by bike, by putting in showers and storage and things like that, we'll give you a concessionary interest rate in order to start changing the culture. So you put a carrot in front of the private sector as a developer and say, great, if you're putting in more lockers and more showers and more bike storage, and you give us data around uptake, we will provide you with a lower cost interest rate, whereas the private sector may not be as willing to lead that conversation at the start. So social impact bonds are similar. They're a contract between a third party and the public sector in which lower interest rates occur upon a particular outcome. So obviously investors have got really strong incentives to focus on the outcomes and performance that they can influence. And again, the example of the office might be another one there, where a social impact bond might say, great, if you can get your percentage of people that are travelling to your office in a single-use car down from 80% to 60%, we'll drop our interest rate from 7 to 5. And if you can take it further, we'll give you more. So all of a sudden, the people in the office are incentivising their staff to change their behaviours with carrots and sticks themselves.
If I could just add to that, the reason why this works in our context is because of the air quality issues from transport in areas that are clean air zones. And that's from the health impact health and air pollution in New Zealand report, which showed that in terms of it's kind of like cars are the new cigarette for public health. So where you've got some people looking for the environmental return, you've got some people looking for the health and social impact, which is all part of this story of shifting the transport system.
Yeah, that's good. So next one there, payment for outcomes contracts are similar, but they're not for capital costs, they're for operating costs. So they're a pretty simple and efficient way to get contracts focusing on outcomes rather than outputs. So your public transport contract might be, instead of just providing these routes and providing these services, you might find ways, and we don't need to delve into the ways, but ways of saying, if you increase your patronage on the buses, we will increase your payment over time. Might be a similar thing for a car share scheme and things like that. So they work really well for some projects. They really don't work for others. So you need really clearly defined outcomes that are measurable, so payments can be made accordingly. Land value capture taxes haven't been done in New Zealand, but are widely used overseas. So that's essentially another tax on the private sector that captures a windfall gain, essentially. So if someone's got a great new light rail public transport depot or stop close to their house has got more demand for it. That person hasn't done anything to contribute towards that demand. So should they take all of that gain, or should they contribute some back to the public sector who are paying the cost of that transport infrastructure? So it hasn't been done in New Zealand, like I said. There's discussions. I won't open a can of worms, but in Auckland around this. And again, it's really well suited to areas where land value can be defined and measured really nicely because of public transport projects. And just a nice caveat there around considerable public consultation required. Road pricing, again, not something we've seen in Christchurch, but the two major types, toll roads and congestion charges. Toll roads, North Island, top of the north, I've already got a number of examples there that work well. A really efficient way to have user pays coming into play and to encourage different behaviours. And some great examples of different behaviours at different times of the day and shifting people to travel off peak, etc. So congestion charge has been considered for Auckland and has been really well used. London's a great example of the rings as you go more concentrically into the city. You've got a good stick to decide whether you are or you're not, and to incentivise behaviour that way. So those are the 6 that we've looked at there that we think are the most, that have the most potential to contribute towards levers for the council to either raise revenue to contribute towards capital costs, or to have the private sector incentivise their own behaviour, with the council taking a leadership role in there. So it's our view that those ones are worth more exploration and looking at the potential quantum of revenue that could be obtained. And then with regards to implementation, what's the costs? What's the timing? Are there legislative considerations that need to be factored in? Internal policies that need to be considered as well. And then delving more and more into not having to reinvent the wheel, but picking up case studies from overseas in detail about what could be picked up there. And then the third point is just a note that this doesn't need just to be a standalone piece of work. Obviously, there's ongoing work within the organisation that these sorts of themes could be applied to as well.
James, that's a pretty quick summary of that, and a pretty good piece of a pretty good paper, should I say. I mean, I'm pretty keen straight up on that green bonds thing, just looking outside the square with what Phil's points are, and the opportunity around hydrogen and that sort of thing. So, Sam.
Great paper. I mean, we need more petrol tax, not less, and the changes we've seen over the last few while, and I understand why we've done them as a country, but the whole transport system needs more money in it, not less money in it. So there's got to be a new way of us trying to press what that levers can look like. And I do think that just a simple GPS road user charge model would see a whole lot of simplicity into the national system without jumping into, this is quite complex compared to a national funding model, which could then be changed year on year for the funding that's going to be required as we reset. The land value capture tax to me sounds a whole lot like the Queenstown model around social housing that they've gone down, which was basically through rezoning, value uplift, and a contribution of social housing into the outcomes for those developers. Was obviously contentious for them. We've raised it around the Greater Christchurch Partnership here over the last couple of years, and probably because of its contentiousness, we haven't proceeded down that route and haven't had that brought back to us. So I think that there's a range of things there we should consider, and if locally we can say we're going to put in this money, then it talks to the partnership that we want to see with government coming to the party with the large investment that we're going to need across Canterbury. So like to think about what we could challenge ourselves with in this space. We have our council's bringing out a transport plan, and it is suggesting road tolls and congestion charging. But we're lucky. Somehow we've got to pay for a study.
You get all of it. You get all the fun ones.
Yeah. But what we're even going a step further, which scares the living daylights out of me, is that we would perhaps, let's pick on ECAN, we would charge ECAN for every car park that they've got out there for their staff to move to come into, and that'll be a bridge too far, I feel. But just following along from what you said, Sam, about how road user charges, every time someone turns an electric car on, James is getting less money for, right?
It's okay.
Yeah, no, this one, he's got one.
Yeah.
But the daft thing about it is, and that's electric's alternative fuel. My hydrogen car has road user charges because it's not exempt like electric cars. So, but we do need take it to the nth degree, and everyone's got an electric car, for argument's sake. There are bugger all road user charges being paid, so they've got to get the money from somewhere. So, thank you.
Far be it for me to wade in on this issue, which I think it much more sits with local government, because we'll get to the central government but in a second. But it is just a point of pedantry. I would be much more comfortable with that bullet point list if congestion charging was road pricing, because congestion charging is a subset of road charging. It's a type of road charging applied for congestion. It may not be the use we apply it for, but I think some degree of road pricing, Bill, you already don't, is worthy of investigation.
I think actually in the report it does have that. I think that's just in the PowerPoint typo. Yeah.
We're actually uncovering a whole other subject here, and which we've talked about at ECAN, which is the energy strategy for Canterbury. Like we haven't had that high level discussion. I know our chief executive has dropped that on the table, but there's no structure around that, Giles, at the moment, is there? But I think the thinking is that we're getting to the stage where if we haven't got infrastructure, how can we expect things to happen to us? And we haven't got an infrastructure in Canterbury to do that. I mean, we need to start thinking that way. Do you want to make a comment? I'm sorry, Nigel.
Yeah, sorry, Pete. I think you raise a really good point, and the fact that you can't have one conversation without the other. We're talking about move or changing fuel use in vehicles, but it's ultimately energy, isn't it? And so they are intrinsically tied. So that we have to have all the conversations at once. They need to be lined up. And unfortunately, if you look on the central government website, energy strategy is still coming. It's very early days. But so a lot of these things, we can do as much as we want to find the solution, but let's not get away from the role of central government. And central government are the biggest taxer in the country. 92% of funding sits with them, and funding of where national and regional priorities sits with them.
Just to recognise that we've got a bit of energy produced in your area, and Nigel, Craig, so what are we doing in terms of trying to line ourselves up with that? Is there an opportunity there for some of that to get some of that money being generated, because it's massive left here? We need to think about it. Go again if you want to. Right?
I'll look at, and I had Megan Woods down recently at the Washdyke Energy Centre, and she was pretty keen for us to be involved and have a workshop with the Mirror Forum or this group or what have you on some of that energy work. So I think we're pretty keen to have a conversation. It's just unfortunately it should have happened first.
Jess, did you want to?
I was just on Mayor Barnes' comments there. Just the New Zealand energy strategy being worked on at the moment, and I think it's aiming to be delivered by 2024. So off the back of that thinking, we'll be involved in those discussions with central government. Obviously, has huge implications in the transport sector, amongst other areas as well. And just on Mayor Major's comments around the emissions from electric cars and the uptake of electric cars and the road user charges discussion. I mean, this is about trying to shift the dial and shift people into those alternative modes of transport. And while we might not be charging road user charges at this point in time, I wouldn't put that off the table necessarily as something. Once you reach that tipping point, you've got people converted into a different type. So yeah, I think just watch this space on that. I think the funding and financing review that Ministry of Transport's undertaking at the moment will be quite telling in terms of the funding of the transport system going forward. So, and that's due to come out, I think, in April, right, or thereabouts, very soon anyway. So.
Thank you. So I think we need to pick this up and have a decent conversation about this. Giles, maybe you and I can start a conversation about this, but capturing a whole lot of other things, capturing what Mark has just talked about in terms of, they're thinking about, how they're going to power their engines up in the North Island, but having like a three types of energy. I think if the infrastructure's there, Richardson's were bold. They've just said, look, we're going to get on and do this, and A320 flying into Christchurch, hydrogen powered within, I don't know how many years is that going to happen, but I mean, it's changing pretty quick for us, so we need to start thinking a bit quicker than what we are. So thank you, Claire, and thank you, James, for this. Did anybody else have an issue? No. So the recommendation is there on the screen. Would someone like to move that, please? Murray, thank you. Seconded by Dan.
Sorry.
I think coming out of that is the fact that there, from my point of view, I don't know if they point to that, but there is more work to be done here in terms of how we unpick this and uncover this.
Yes, so I guess we're looking for the committee to agree that this is actually what you want us to investigate and keep progressing with these types of investigations in terms of funding and financing options for transport, or not.
Point with that is that, and the point I was trying to make, yes, from my point of view, yes, but there's a wider conversation that we also need to pick up. It should not be floating on its own, if you like. And I'd see Giles agreeing with me. So I don't know how we do this, but we just need to have a decent conversation about this somewhere. So if the mayors are happy with that, and maybe we report more formally through Mayoral Forum, Nigel, about where we're at with this, because if it works into the fact that we need, we need a energy strategy, then the mayors need to be aware of that and how it affects them and what that means. Yeah. Right. So got to move in a second. All those in favour, please say aye. All those against, that's carried. Now we're moving to and so all those against, yeah, that's carried. GPS. Thank you, James. Thanks. Jess.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the purpose of this report is to seek delegation to the chair of the Regional Transport Committee to sign off on a submission on the draft 2024 Government Policy Statement on Land Transport on the committee's behalf. We're expecting the draft GPS to be released sometime in April. I believe it's been delayed slightly for various reasons in the North Island at this present time. And there's potentially a relatively short window, as there is always with submissions to central government for providing feedback on that. So given that this committee doesn't actually meet again until June, having this delegation in place will just ensure that we have the opportunity to provide feedback and have that submission signed out through the chair. Staff will work closely with your Transport Officers Group members and members of this committee to have input into the submission, so we can do that via email, which we've done previously as well. So that's the purpose of this paper, is really to get that delegation from the committee. So
very much. I think that's right. I mean, we're a submission overload, aren't we, as a group? But James, a comment from you.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Just a few comments. Just to be clear, I mean, I guess it comes through, but just so that we're all very clear here, that the GPS consultation is a Ministry of Transport process, not a Whakamutunga process, although obviously we're bound by it. Just to correct one point in point 11, the NLTP 21 to 24 was topped up by $2 billion worth of borrowing, not $1 billion. And I guess I would partially dispute the problem facing us going forward. It isn't so much in the near term declining revenue, so much as the relative rate of growth in demand for expenditure versus the relative rate of growth of income, right? So the income isn't growing as fast as our desire / need of to spend on the various categories. So we have a rapidly shrinking amount of money available to spend on anything that we might desire additionally. And that's aside from the arguments that will absolutely be made around this table and others about the need to spend more on things like maintenance and what have you. So whilst I think you're right, there is a looming problem out there in terms of EV application for RUC and things like that. In the near term, I mean, I can got it here that the current GPS, if you look at that in the forward forecast for available revenue for the state highway improvements activity class at the end of its 10-year period, so we're already 3 years into that now, or we will be, there's only $300 million. And that's not because the revenue is growing, it's because we're spending more paying off the PPPs in the North Island. Okay. So it's just a little bit more complex than just declining revenue. There's a lot going on there. It's certainly more demand for things to be spent on. And look, the last point from me would simply be to say, I think there's definitely sense in Canterbury speaking with a united voice and effectively the Merrill Forum anyway without me. So combined submissions in that. But I, from a Waka Kotahi perspective and my ability to help you understand the impact on us and how we plan Canterbury's transport network, I really would strongly endorse the opportunity to have workshops if it's at all possible in the timing window that we've got. You've got consultation on the GPS coming April now. Jesse, you mentioned earlier there's consultation on the future financing at the same time. They are going to be bound together. I think it's absolutely true to note what officers have noted that there's likely to be reasonable alignment between the strategic priorities of the GPS that's coming and where the RLTP is at the moment. But it isn't just the strategic priorities. There's an awful lot of devil in the detail. And the stronger that Canterbury can speak in that submission, Mr. Chair, the better for Canterbury as we prepare the review of the RLTP. So I know timing's tight, but let's, if we can, try to be agile to come together, even if I have to join in the Merrill Forum or whatever. I wouldn't want timing to exclude a good submission.
No, I think you'll find that we'll give you a good submission, James. You'll get one. Oh, well, you could be a minister. I think the thing is that the expectations aren't high here, but our expectations should be high. And I think our expectations are what we think should be high. And I know that the dollars may be shrinking, like you're pointing forward, but I think the opportunity to engage and then maybe reshape what we're trying to do is also there for us too. That there are more than one way to skin a cat here. And we have to be realistic, as I said right at the start of this meeting, about what that means. We're chasing money from central government on a whole lot of things, and the begging bowl approach doesn't seem to work all that well. So we need to be a bit more innovative on that, and hopefully we can take that opportunity, Jess, when we do this.
Through Mr. Chair, we certainly could look at an option around maybe an online workshop or something if the mayors are available to work through the GPS when it does land and the submission points that we want to make. So we have done that in the past with you. So maybe we can, when we know a date more specifically, we'd be able to work with the Secretariat to arrange a time, possibly, and workshop that with you, and then narrow the points of the submission so that it is, as you say, James, representative of Canterbury and where we want to go.
And I think the other thing is the Transport Officers Group will be deep into this in terms of where we head with this, and they exist within your organisation. So, I mean, use them as access and maybe, get some of that detail worked out so that we can have a decent conversation about that. Anyway, I don't know if we can debate that too much more. Sam.
I'd just like to support what Jesse said, but I don't like workshops that are online. Just because you end up in a space where you get your little 3 minutes. They're great for information sharing. They're no good for the type of discussion I think we get to have in this room, where you sit there, you say your 3 minutes, and then you wait another hour and a half till you feel like you can actually get into the conversation again. So just the type of submission that we're going to go for here, I think if we can get back in the room together, it would be better. And I was going to say it's an extraordinary meeting. We don't actually need that. If we're going to approve that Peter can sign it off, we'll have a workshop in the interim, and then we've approved that.
And you know, Mark, I know that there isn't a seat with your name and a voting right here, but you should be part of that process also. I intend to write to Minister Wood after this, because I think we need to get you on this committee so that we don't have to keep, you know, asking you to speak. You can speak when you need to speak. So we'll do that also. So the recommendation is there on, and it's been moved by Murray. Is that right? Did you move it? Yeah, and Craig seconded it before we even got the headline underway. So that's good. So all those in favour, please say aye. Aye. All those against, and that's carried. So now moving to James, 8.8.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Look, I want to apologise to the committee. Quite an amount of time has passed since we last met, and it's the nature of these things that it's quite difficult to summarise all of what's happened and what is worthy of bringing to your attention from us. I'll take the presentation that I've put in the agenda as read. I'm happy to answer questions on it. I will, however, dwell on the first slide, which is 136 in your agendas, in a second. Before I do, though, I wanted to give you just all a brief update on the summer maintenance program. We are in the very fortunate position in the South Island of having had a good summer, which the North Island simply can't claim. We had a very important maintenance period this summer after coming off the back of the winter and the summer that we had previously. You're all well aware, I'm sure you know, of road conditions as we exited winter. At the end of January, we were just over 40% of the way through. Our contractors were just over 40% of the way through their programs in North and South Canterbury. They are very large programs, the North Canterbury one in particular. We're feeling pretty good though about, as long as this rain goes away, about the North Canterbury one largely coming in on track. We've got a few more concerns about the performance in South Canterbury, but we will do what we can to make sure that that is locked down. I think though it is worth saying we are in just such a better position than the North Island. I mean, the North Island now, after the events of the last fortnight and the weather that had occurred through the summer up till that point, their summer programs are in tatters, and they are looking at a winter of, at the extreme end, no roads, but equally on the rest of their networks, a really serious problem of going into winter in terms of maintenance. But I just wanted to say, actually, sometimes we're feeling like we're actually feeling okay here, which is better than I could say elsewhere. And just on the first slide, the NLTP activity classes. Look, you've all heard from us in different ways. Your organisations have. We've tried to keep you updated on the information, but it is really important, particularly given the discussion we had on the government policy statement that's coming forward. The NLTP is under serious pressure, as are your own programs and your capacity to deliver them in an environment of cost escalation and limited ability to find extra income. So we have, as noted there, revised the activity classes down. Partly that is in anticipation of exactly what I said. We all know that we're not actually going to be able to deliver in many respects our full program, and we do in that sense appreciate the work of approved organisations in reassessing their programs. It might not always be popular, but clearer signals about what you think you can deliver and what you can't is really useful as we try to keep the NLTP going towards the end of the period. And it is just a word of warning that should your councils be interested in newer stuff, those activity classes are under extreme pressure, and where we had previously indicated at the beginning of the NLTP period, I think we had a class of probables and possibles outside of those we even gave the tick. It's going to be very difficult to get anything new through that isn't already, greenlit through the NLTP, which I think sharpens the focus, Mr. Chair, for the conversation about the GPS and future funding for land transport, because the forward picture doesn't look much better. With that, I think questions is probably the easiest way to go.
Yeah, it's all pretty interesting stuff, and I just hope that we can capture some of what's been said, so that we can shape a decent conversation. Anybody got any barbs to anything to say to James? Any questions of James? And
The Road to Zero program, James,
Yes.
what's happening to it?
I don't mean to be obtuse, but in what way?
Just doesn't seem to be much activity out there, is there? As far as lanes go.
In terms of infrastructure improvement, I know it's a fair comment. So Road to Zero writ large is a very large program of work over multiple NLTP periods. So one component of which actually is speed, which we talked about earlier in the agenda in terms of the speed management plans that are coming, and the other side of that being infrastructure improvements. I will endeavour actually to make sure I bring to the next RTC meeting how you guys, how local government are doing on your part of the infrastructure, the safety infrastructure improvement programs. I've got the data, I just don't have it with me. But my impression is that actually, as local authorities, you're actually doing a reasonable job on your stuff. It would be fair to say that we are struggling as an agency on the state highway side of things, particularly when it comes to rolling out medium barrier. It is not popular. I'm not telling you what you don't already know. And we are attempting to make that up by going faster, where we think that is possible and sensible. Where it's worth doing. It will probably mean I start to have some interesting conversations with a number of you about possibilities of parts of state highways in your areas. But even that acceleration, I've got to say, in light of the last 2 weeks for the North Highland component, looks really tough, because you can't put medium barrier on a road that's not there anymore. But we remain committed to it. It's still the government strategy. We've got a large activity class for local roads and state highways that we can access to fund it, and we're trying to find ways to work smarter, and particularly with the contracting sector, in order to get it to happen without compromising people's experience of the state highway.
Thanks, James. Just a question. Just before Christmas, we applied for it and got. I'm just checking to see if my other councillors think the same way as me. We applied for and got $33 million from you, and that was good. And I said, thanks very much. But then we sat back yesterday, I wasn't at the meeting, and said, oh, we can't possibly do this. So we gave you $7 million back. Okay. Yeah. And one of my councillors said, oh no, we'll just apply for it next year. I said, do you think with what's happening in the North Island that James has got money lying around his back pocket? Would that be a fair comment?
I knew we'd get there one way or the other. So let me make some brief comments about what's happening in the North Island. Because actually, from a Canterbury point of view, we've been there. Both in Christchurch and Karakia. And so we've actually got a lot of experience to lend our colleagues in the North Island as they go through what they're going through. The government has made an immediate decision to pass us $250 million to effectively allow us to progress with the emergency works, which of course needs to be done. There's no question about that. That is only a bridging position, right? It is very clear that there will be vastly more investment required the point, I think, of the $250 million is really to get us into a cycle where they can consider the investment required in line with the rest of the budget. So it'll allow us, because our board has a duty to stay solvent. So, it needs that assurance in order to be able to progress with what it's doing. So to come to your substantive point, honestly, it's simply too early to tell what will be the resource allocation or reallocation, or what will need to be done, both from a financial point of view in terms of pure funding, but equally from a resourcing point of view. I was having conversations last week with many contractors down here who are already thinking, well, gee, what can we do? What do we need to be doing up there rather than what we've got on our plates down here? So it's definitely something that this committee will need to grapple with as we work through the GPS, because the part of the reason for the 2-week delay on terms of the GPS consultation is checking that we're comfortable with the Crown is comfortable with that GPS in light of what it now has on its plate. But I don't think there is a sense, not that I've picked up from the public comments that you will have all seen too, that this is something the NLTP can or should be expected to do on its own, because there isn't the capacity there. No.
It's got to be.
So I'm sorry. The answer is we'll see. We're not there. We don't know. But I take your point.
Thank you. I think the consensus that we've gathered is that there's a lot of things going to slow down here to make space, and just how that affects us will probably be, just in conversation with our CE here anyway, is that that won't be fully known for another 6 to 8 weeks, and so I think good weather and getting your maintenance under James is awesome that we can do that. So look, I don't know if we need any more discussion here. Yes.
One thing, just there's a slide there on the VKT reduction planning, and I just wanted to note that we had a presentation from Waka staff today talking about the VKT reduction program over the course of this between now and December. National VKT reduction plan coming out midway through the year, and a requirement for tier 1 urban areas, so the greater Christchurch area. Appreciate that there's a focus on this. Having their VKT reduction plans developed by December this year. There's also an expression of interest process as part of that to obtain some support funding from there's a $22.5 million pool of money for national and sub-regional VKT reduction planning across the country. So that expression of interest needs to be in by the end of March. So just to make the mayors around the table from the Greater Christchurch space aware of that. So we'll be working with your staff, your transport managers, to pull together a bid, an expression of interest to collectively put that to the Waka Kotahi for that funding, or a portion of that funding to support that work through the partnership and the transport work we're doing there. So thanks, Ben.
Yeah, noted, Jason. Thanks for that update. So can we go to 8.8 then? Can I have a mover of that, please? Thank you, Nigel. Seconded by, thank you, Ian. All those in favour, please say aye. All those against, that's carried. 8.9, Jess.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate I'm the last paper between you and dinner and a drink. So this is the purpose of this paper is just to receive the annual monitoring report for the Regional Land Transport Plan. That's included as the attachment. This was previously circulated to you in December last year, so you've already seen this. I'll take the paper as read. If there are any questions, happy to answer those, and other staff in the room here to help answer those, and also Luke online. But otherwise, I'll just take the paper as read. It's something you've seen previously.
I think that's entirely acceptable, and I don't know if there'll be any discussion. So the recommendation is there at 8.9. Have we got someone that will move that? Thanks, Sam. Seconded by Neil. Thank you. All those in favour, please say aye. All those against, that's carried. Thanks for that. I know we always get to the end and we skip through that last bit, which somewhere along the line we're going to have to stop and have a decent conversation on it. But doesn't look like it's today. Our next meeting is going to be on Thursday, the 1st of June, 2023 at 4:15 here. And I will finish, if it's okay with you, Ron?
Murray.
Oh, Murray. Oh, yes, that's sorry.
My apologies for that, but it is really probably to raise a concern that is increasingly becoming problematic within the Amberley settlement, given that State Highway 1 dissects that urban boundary. And I know it's been raised with James before, and I've talked with James previously today, but I have given it my guarantee to the community that I need to, this is the right forum to get it into a system. You know, we encourage walking and cycling, but actually crossing State Highway with the daily traffic movements is becoming increasingly more concerning to the community that I live. And I just wanted to table it here so that I haven't let my community down. And so thank you for that. And James, I'm happy for James to actually just give me some feedback via email, but
Very, Mr. Chair. No, look, I think it is worth being clear in this forum because Mari, I've also had discussions with your colleague to my left about Town of Darfield and from the Mayor of Ashburton about Kaya and others. I mean, there are a number of rural Canterbury towns that are bisected by state highways where crossing is increasingly difficult. As we build towards the update of the RLTP, one of the processes that Waka Kotahi will go through is building what we are delightfully referring to this cycle as the SHIP, the State Highway Improvement Program. We love acronyms in Waka Kotahi. We clearly need that drink. And look, I just want to make it clear in this forum that we have an intention to have in that a line that is looking at all those Canterbury towns and the need for safer crossings as particularly heavy traffic increases on the state highway. So I'm not trying to dismiss Amberley's issue, but Amberley's issue is actually a similar one to the one in Darfield is similar to the one. We need to profile that properly at a regional level and find a way to address it. So it's absolutely on our radar. And you can assure your community as such.
Thanks, Murray, for raising, because it does affect all of us. We've got state highways through our districts. So just wondering whether there's each item by itself is always just a bit too small to raise. So it's the packaging of it, and then who's going to be responsible for the packaging? So next time there's projects that are $5 to $20 million, we've actually got a Canterbury package that can land, and can that sit within this committee, or is that?
This committee's job.
So like, this is a follow up to that. Can we have some report back on how that can be done? And
Chair, I'm happy to work with James and our colleagues at Waka to shape that up and bring something back as through the committee at the next meeting, if you like. Yeah, some advice around that anyway.
Thanks, Peter. And I'm just going to go back to page 40. And you shot past it, and I missed it. It's my fault. It's that letter I wrote on the 25th of August to the meeting, and about the underfunding of the roads and the TAs. Down the road on it, it talks about that the options will be brought forward in the Canterbury Regional Transport Plan midterm review process. So when is that process? Now, so the request I had at that meeting was to find out what the TAs were being underfunded by in the areas. Now, when can we get that information?
I thought that information was already got, actually, and Claire's nodding her head. So let's just recircle back and get that again.
I don't recall receiving it. Yeah, and others do. But
So we can take that as an action and circulate that around to the committee outside the meeting process, if you like. So, yep.
Right. Thank you, Murray. That was great. No, you did well. So Yeah, and we did say that we were going to do general business and I skipped over it. So sorry about that. My apologies about that. But if I can just finish now, with, Karakia. Anuia kiti uru tapanui o tānei kia waitia kia mama. Tina kia tina na ti wairua iti arataka korai rongo pakari aki. Ronga kia tina. Helmi e hui e. Aye, yeah, cool. Thank you very much.